All right, welcome back, grade 10s. We have 10 questions left to preview, and then it's going to be kind of like an open question and answer time, and then we'll give you the remainder of the class to study. Once again, just a reminder that this Thursday, the 12th, is our final multiple choice, and that is 15% of the year. And tomorrow, some of you will be writing an A1, some can write an essay if they would prefer, and I photocopied some multiple choice. So if that's your path, then that will be your path there as well. So tomorrow is kind of like either I didn't do an exam or I'd like to do better on an exam opportunity for you. So the last 10 questions on Thursday. So we definitely have recurring themes of what would a supporter or a proponent of globalization say under these circumstances. So one of the skills that you'll be tested on is that idea of looking at a scenario and saying, how would someone who likes globalization respond to this? So for example, an issue could be something like gender rights. How would a supporter of globalization respond to issues of gender inequality in the world? So definitely some opportunity to slow down on Thursday and think critically as you look at the exam. Definitely the gender gap will be mentioned specifically on the test. So the gender gap is this idea that in society men and women don't have equal opportunity. And often it is measurable, and that measurement could be seen as a gender gap. So if you look at the CEOs or the CFOs or the COOs, the leaders of corporate America, and if you define them by gender, you would see that there's a gender gap. That majority of chief executive officers, chief financial officers, chief operating officers of Fortune 500 companies are male. So that's an example of a gender gap. But we also have an ingenuity gap. An ingenuity gap is referring to comparing the first and maybe the developing world and looking at, to what extent is there an opportunity for a knowledge-based economy. So there'll be the term ingenuity gap there as well. You'll have two speakers for questions 51 to 53. And the two speakers are talking about issues that women face today. Might be a good time to just acknowledge that the United States will have their first female vice president starting January 21st, 2021. And, she's only the 47th vice president, so 46 men before her. But that's another example of gender inequality in America's history. But here they're going to be talking about women's groups and technology and malnutrition, access to things like the internet. So this is where you might have the digital divide that you like to talk about so much. Yes, I did go there. It is your favorite.
What's our favorite?
He likes to mention the digital divide in his essays when he talks about disparity. Another idea that you might see here is the concept of a lack of infrastructure in the developing world being a cause of some of the inequality that we see. But basically these three questions, 51 and 53, there's two speakers that you have to look at. You have to find what issue to them is most distressing. So it's one of those things that you have to say, okay, they might see many of these distressing, but based upon what they're saying, what's the most distressing thing here? So you have to, evaluate, you have to prioritize. And the things you're looking at are things like child poverty, gender gap, ingenuity gap, and female CEOs not being put into positions of power. You also, not only which is the most distressing for number one, they basically ask that same question for 52, what is the greatest concern for number two? So you're answering that same question twice, once for each speaker. And then which of the following actions would be most acceptable to both speakers? So again, I really think we could have just gave you an A1 and called it a year, because you're looking at number 53 here, you're really looking at an A1 skill. Which of the following actions would be most acceptable to both? That's a relationship, right? What do they have in common? So a lot of what we did with A1 all year, and that's the main thing we did all year, helps you on the multiple choice as well. So that's why when students of mine say, I can do an A1, but I can't do multiple choice, I'm like, but you can. It's the same skill. It's actually easier here because you don't have to write about it. You just have to, start telling yourself that you can do well in multiple choice, build some confidence, have some success, and you will see a change. 54, 55, again, we have 2 sources, 2 speakers. So there's quite a bit of reading on this exam. So you need to be rested. And definitely because there's quite a bit of reading on the exam, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So you should be trying to get done on Thursday by 10. And hopefully it's not one of those times when, hey, your friend's done at 10, so you're like, oh, I'm done too, here's my test, we're out of here. Don't sprint to the end just because your friend is done. So 54 and 55, 2 speakers about foreign aid, looking at industrialized nations, helping industrializing nations with those terms like interdependence. There's words like alleviate hunger, get rid of hunger. It's looking at the idea of donor companies or countries. So chapter 15 in the textbook talks about aid. Maybe flip through that. Like I said, don't read the textbook, but skim through it to ensure that you can understand it. So there's a little bit in chapter 14 and 15 that you could go back and skim through here for sure. So question 54, for example, says, source 1 suggests that food aid will do something. So what you need to do to get that question right is consider your 4 options. Consider how each option is different. What makes A different than B, B different than C, C different than D, and then match it up. So it's a time-consuming process, and that's why some students struggle in multiple choice, is they don't like to invest that much time per question. But if you spend 5 minutes on number 54, you'll get it right. Then 56, 57, 58, and 59 are all based on 3 sources, much like A1. We have a graph about child labor. We have a cartoon about child labor, and we have a quote about child labor. So similar to the essay A1 or the A1 assignment that you wrote last week. So number 56 says, which conclusion can be drawn from an analysis of source 1? So being that 56 only talks about source 1, you have to read the question first and say, okay, now I don't even have to look at 2 and 3 yet. I only have to look at 1. So I'm not going to muddy my waters of my brain by trying to sort through all 3. I'm only going to do what is required from the prompt that I have next. 57 then says, which civic action would least likely be taken by an advocate of source 2? So this is where somebody might put up their hand and say, Mr. McBurney, what's a civic action? So in the last couple of chapters, they focus on citizenship. And civic action is when an individual or a corporation decides that they, like Gandhi, want to be the change they want to see for the world. They're becoming involved as a citizen, right? So maybe they're sponsoring a child, maybe they're leading a protest, maybe they're signing a petition, donating money. These are all examples of trying to take some action to change your city in a positive way. Another question will be, what is the cause of the issue presented? So we show you an issue of inequality where you have somebody working in a sweatshop and someone benefiting from the shoes made in the sweatshop. And the question is, what caused that? So in order to understand number 58, first you have to figure out, well, what is the issue? And the issue is disparity, the issue is exploitation. And then you gotta say, okay, what causes this? Is it a wealth gap? Is it unemployment? Is it discrepancy? Is it government regulation? And then finally, there's a question that says all the sources deal with which issue? That's, again, like the relationship part of an A1. So lots of great stuff here on this test. This is a excellent test. And then finally, number 60, one last question, one last cartoon, and it's, what is the perspective of the cartoonist? And it's talking about justice and capitalism And I think if you look at the details within the cartoon, it becomes quite easy. So, how do you study for the test? Definitely vocabulary is a key first step. Because if you don't know the building blocks of the questions, you can't respond to them. But then the next step, after you understand the vocabulary, and you might want to just go back over the textbook, skim through it, look at some of the key sources. Look in your notes, look in our online lessons, review some of those key sources. But honestly, it's going to require a good night's sleep on Wednesday night. It's going to require a healthy breakfast on Thursday morning, and it's a performance. There's lots of things that you could do right now to get ready for a basketball game on Thursday, but if you don't get a good night's sleep on Wednesday night, or if you don't eat well before the basketball game, or if you eat too well before the basketball game, you're not going to perform well. This is a performance-based exam as much as it is a memorization exam. So there is an onus on you to be testable, be test ready on Thursday morning. So I'll answer your questions and then I'll give you the rest of the class to review. So we went over the 60 questions on the test. Do you have any questions? Do you have any questions?
No.
Do you have any questions? Seems like a lot of no's, so I'm going to stop recording because the people that will watch this, they don't need to listen to us have dead airspace. If a question pops up in the next 20 or 30 minutes, please ask. Otherwise, tomorrow you're coming here to do a makeup A1, makeup essay, or another attempt at multiple choice, or you're coming to study for multiple choice. All right, enjoy the rest of the day to study.